Right. Do I have a motion to call the February 20th, 2025 Gordon Burnell Governance Council regular meeting to order?
Yes, I motion to call the governance meeting to order.
Thank you, Jody. Do I have a second?
This is Michelle and I'll second.
Thank you, Michelle. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. And this is new for us. We are going to do a quick roll call so that folks watching the recording or in the meeting can know who is all here. My name is Martha Hughes. I am the board president. And I'll just kind of, we'll do popcorn style. Beth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Beth Dorado, director at Gordon Burnell. Emmy.
Sammy Marquez, I'm the business manager at Gordon Burnell. And I'll do Diane.
Diane Hensley, I am the assistant business manager at Gordon Burnell. Martha?
I'll pass it to Michelle.
And I'm Michelle Staley, and I'm a member. And I will pass it to Tina.
I'm also a board member. To Jonathan.
I'm a teacher at North Fourth, and I will pass it to Jody.
Sorry about that. I was trying to find the mute button or the unmute button. I am Jody Boucher. I am a board member.
And I think we'll pass it to Chris Cazone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Cazone, and I'm the administrator at the MDC campus. Is there anybody left?
We also have Janelle.
Okay.
We also have, oh,
Hi, I'm Janelle. Oh, sorry. I'm Janelle Amador. I'm a teacher at the MDC campus.
and Annie.
Hi, my name is Annie Salas. I'm the adult education coordinator with Gordon Burnell.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today.
Did you get Deb?
Oh, did we not? Sorry, Deb. I was jumping around too much.
Victoria, and I'm a board member.
Great. Anyone else that I missed? Great. Do I have a motion to approve today's agenda?
I move to approve today's agenda.
Thank you, Tina. Do I have a second?
This is Michelle and I'll second.
Thank you, Michelle. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have approved today's agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the January meeting? It's like, what month was that? January.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from January.
Thank you, Tina. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Jody. All in favor?
Aye.
We have approved the minutes from the January 2025 meeting. And we're gonna go ahead and take just a pause before we let Jonathan share. Sammy and Diane are gonna present the finance review just because they need to move on to some other activities. So we're gonna get a quick review of finances. Please, other board members, if you have more in-depth questions, feel free to ask. We did discuss them during the committee in depth, but you're always welcome to ask for more clarification if you need.
Awesome, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share. Okay, can you see my screen? There we go. Okay, so we did have quite a few bars this month, but I did just want to let you guys know that The majority of them are what we call our cash carryover bars. So we do these annually after the audit is released. Basically what we're doing is we're truing up or truing down our cash on hand to reflect what we actually have. So we're not losing money, we're not gaining money, but when we create our budgets in March, April, May, we're projecting what we think our ending cash balances are going to be. And so what we do now is we're truing up or truing down what they actually are based on our projections. And so you'll see all of these are increases. We did have one decrease, but again, we're not losing money. It's just truing it up or down to what we actually have on hand. And if we have a decrease, it just means we spent more money by the end of the year than we were projecting, which is fine. But the rest are increases. We do have this one increase right here for our Carl Perkins Fund. The final awards went out, and so we did get a slight increase for this fund. The rest of the bars are transfer bars, just to clean up our funding sources at the function level. But does anyone have any questions about these? I'm not going to go one by one through them. But does that all make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions? Questions? Alrighty, I'll go ahead and move on. Do a quick overview just of our graphs that we usually look at. We always like to look at where we're sitting funds, the percent of budget. And so of course we don't want to be over 100%. We do have one that's just slightly over due to an encumbrance that will be fixed by next month. But the rest of them look good. You'll see a lot of our reimbursable funds, federal funds, those are high percentages. That's really what we want to see at this point in the year, because we are trying to get all of those spent down. These ones at the end, they do carry cash, so they roll over, and that's why they're a little bit lower. That's not urgent to spend these as of right now, but everything there looks good. Our expenditure comparison, again, like we talked about the last few months, we have our 3 big principal payments that were made, and so we have those outliers there. We should go back to our normal monthly expenditures as we go. And again, looking at our spending in the classroom, when we look at our function code here, it is skewed because our capital is so high right now, but we typically sit around that 65%. But everything here looks good. Our liquidity, we are sitting at a 7.52, which is great. The only reason why you see this decrease is because we did not receive our reimbursement for that second principal payment within the month. And so we received it, I think, at the beginning of this month. And so it wasn't reflected in these financials, but you'll see it level back out. But 7.52 is still very strong, 7 months worth of cash on hand, which is great. And then of course our budget is here, just more of a breakdown of those funds that we saw earlier and their percentages. So like we said, we have that one that's just slightly over budget. Any questions on any of our graphs or charts? No? Awesome. We have our check listing. Again, we went through this during the finance committee meeting. I always point out anything that's an outlier. So we had our final principal payment there. The rest of the checks looked good. Nothing out of the ordinary. Were there any questions on any of our checks? No questions? Awesome. And then of course, just jumping down to our bank reconciliation. And everything does tie out, and we do not have any outstanding checks. Everything is from December and January, and so everything looks good there. Any questions on any of this? No?
Thank you, Sammy. So appreciate your
Thank
hard
you.
work on the finances, and also Diane. We'll be looking for those checks. All right, so let's move to the action items related to finance. Do I have a motion to approve accounts payable and payroll vouchers?
I move to approve accounts payable and the payroll vouchers.
Thank you, Tina. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Deb. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We have approved accounts payable and payroll vouchers. Do I have a motion to approve budget adjustment requests or bars?
I move to approve the bars.
Thank you, Tina. A second?
This is Michelle and I'll second.
Thanks, Michelle. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right, we have approved the bars. And I think that's all for finances for today. So thank you so much, Sammy and Diane, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting us move it to first too.
Definitely appreciate your time. All right. Well, we will go ahead then and move back to our teacher of the month. Welcome, Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll pass it off to you and Beth with the questions.
I'll steal the microphone for just a quick minute to introduce Jonathan. Jonathan, remind me, you've been with the school for 5 years?
This is my 8th.
Oh my gosh, I totally underestimated that number right there. Your 8th year. Thank you. So Jonathan has been with the school for 8 years. I was going to say 5 or 6, and I was low with both of them. I started at the Job Corps campus and then moved to our North 4th campus when those 2 campuses combined. Jonathan is currently our humanities teacher at the North 4th campus. So he teaches all of our ELA courses and our social studies courses on the high school side. But he also has taken on a lot of other duties. Because he's familiar with the Job Corps campus, having started there, he's also one of the major liaisons with the Albuquerque Job Corps staff, and in terms of us being compliant with reports and the variety of information that flows back and forth between us and that community partner. He's currently the department head of the humanities department. And so he's really, what I want to say about Jonathan is just how impressed I am with how he's dedicated to personal growth and professional growth. He's been always excited to participate in the many initiatives we have going on. He's always at the front of the line to learn more about capstones, or to learn more about curriculum, or to learn more about teaching, because we were his first stop in an educator's career. And so, he's been really proactive, been open to doing things like recording his lessons and reflecting on them, and just always agreeable and always thoughtful and always passionate and always right behind his students in terms of working with them and alongside them. So Jonathan, thank you so much for being here today. I've just got one question for you as you spend some time talking to the board, and that is, how do you see our mission and vision play out in your day-to-day job?
Okay. First, thank you so much for the honor, and thank you so much for the kind words, Beth. It has been an honor and privilege to work here. I think about the mission of the school in kind of 2 different ways. I think of our mission as in our core mission, transforming lives from the inside out, kind of our foundation and our core. And I look at the kind of big transition we began to make a couple years ago in moving away from just Gordon Burnell Charter School to a Gordon Burnell Community School, and our mission there. And I have seen so much growth and change, and both by, I think, exciting projects and bold and, I would say, very amazing moves made by leadership, kind of seeing the winds of where things were going, and with our ability and need to adapt to kind of just current situations and climates. When I first started, we very much had very segmented campuses. Job Corps was locked in with just Job Corps. Much of what was at Roma. From what I remember, a lot of the focus really was on reducing recidivism. It is working both with the community, but also making sure that there is a kind of pipeline and a safe place for our MDC students to go once they got out. And a lot of things changed, especially kind of after COVID. We merged campuses and we brought over to the North Fourth location Job Corps students, many of whom it was a full reset from the ones we had because when COVID happened, all the Job Corps kids basically were like kicked out like within a couple days when everything shut down. And we spent a couple years basically clinging on to like a handful of students and doing online lessons and doing kind of packet work and through the mail, making sure that they got through. But it really was a rebuilding time when we were here at North Fourth. And I noticed at least two things happening. First, there was a lot more community investment and excitement about what we were doing. We had local organizations and groups eager to partner with us. We had a lot of people just coming in from the community. And on top of that, our student body shifted from kind of basically Job Corps students and honestly what were mostly adult students. And the age cap definitely impacted this. So we went from kind of having a student body that, at least for me, felt like it averaged basically like 19 to 23 to coming down to closer to like 17 and 17 years old. And in the last couple of years, what we have transitioned to do is we've started working with a lot of kids who basically fell through the cracks through COVID. And our curriculum prior to that and our focus was, okay, these are motivated individuals who are looking to get their lives right. They're showing up. They basically just kind of need coaching and encouragement. And what we've had students here who basically are transferring to us from middle school and from a couple almost elementary school, where they disappeared after 5th grade. So what we have done is, I see as a school, we've begun to shift kind of our curriculum, our approach, and our structure to meet the needs of the students that are coming with us. Whereas there was a lot more self-motivated, self-paced, we've actually, and through the leadership of Beth and especially Chris Pauls, we've kind of revolutionized in many ways the schedule, the structure, the order, as we've had this influx of students who've come in who, like, honestly have had very little boundaries but are very eager to learn. And we've at least had that academic mission. And in this year, we've rolled out new curriculum with math and with English, which students were slow to adopt. However, we have seen pretty incredible great gains, at least from an academic standpoint and skills wise. When it comes to the community aspect, big shout out to what Beth and especially Sarah have built with our community partners, whether it be Michael with the Three Sisters Kitchen, us with the housing program, and bringing in all sorts of other contractors, specifically giving students exposure to the arts and a lot of other mental health services. Students have, it was slow adopting for the first couple months, and students have responded very well, very strongly. And I think this sets us up for two specific things moving forward as a school, looking where the state is going. With the state kind of moving towards capstones, we did get involved with that, and I worked with Future Focus for 2 years. And I worked alongside Julie, Beth, and several others in kind of putting together a vision for what we would do with Gordon Burnell. And I think through building out community partners and through recalibrating our curriculum, I think our students are actually set up to succeed in these pathways and in these projects. And what we have seen is, I would say, a different type of transformation than when I first started. I know for a lot of the stories when I first came here, it was people kind of just getting their life back on track. A lot of people coming through with recovery, and I am grateful that we're still working with tons of different people like that through Sarah, Ingrid, that is our focus and our support. But as our population has expanded out to a different demographic, leadership and teachers here, we've been able to, I feel like, pivot and begin to bring support and transformation. We're seeing a lot of kids were just terrified to leave their houses, terrified to socialize, in need of a lot of emotional and social support. We've seen a lot of them kind of come into themselves. We've been able to give them space and room, not just to kind of even function and focus, but actually, thrive academically, because that was, and that has been one of the stumbling blocks and hindrances that a lot of our students face. So, in looking at transformation, I think our connections to the community with all of the other projects, and I wish I could speak more on behalf of adult ed and what's happening at MDC. What I have heard from staff members and what I've seen with my eyes is people who are eager, people who are involved, and I'm hearing a lot of good things. Even the when it comes to the community school act, like mission and focus, the stories I've heard from Polk are incredible, and we are getting students coming in from there. So I have found it pretty remarkable, all of the things that we've been able to impact and touch the community with, even as a relatively pretty small school. And to sum it up, because of all of these things, I am very grateful to have been part of this school and to work alongside my coworkers and work with y'all.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jonathan. It's always wonderful for us to hear directly from educators and staff and hear about, especially that context of how the school has grown and changed. So really appreciate you sharing today, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Jonathan, you're welcome to hang out. Board meetings are open to the public, but you're also welcome to sneak away if you'd like. I really appreciate you being here this afternoon.
I'll stay for a little bit. I'm just interested in what y'all are doing. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And so I just wanted to open it up. This is our time for public comment. Are there any other folks that we have that wanted to share something publicly? Okay, just thought I would double check. So no past business to address this time, and we will just a little bit of information for the board. We are shifting after our training to adhering to the 30-30-30 model of really trying to focus 30% of the meeting on finance, compliance, and policy, followed by 30% on academic performance goals, and then another 30% on board priorities. Sometimes there will be overlaps between these kind of three areas. Not every meeting will be exactly 30-30-30, but just sort of in recognition that we would like the board to be a little bit more active in terms of having input towards goals and helping to track academics and help support staff and the school in general around academics. So for today, we're shifting a little bit. You notice Sammy was pretty quick with the finance review. Same with Beth's director's report. Really, when we receive the documents, read carefully through all that's provided. And if you have any pressing questions, of course, bring those up. But in the past, Beth would really read through, the director's report. We're going to kind of scale that back and just focus on things tied to action items. And so that's where you'll kind of see our current business will be segmented a little bit differently to have those different areas. So Beth, are there things for compliance and policy review that you'd like to share?
I couldn't find my unmute button, so sorry. We do have two policies up for review and possible approval today. I'm gonna start with the action item D first, the school visitors policy. There's nothing significantly different about this policy than what we've been currently doing. The reason this policy is before you is so that it can be right at the top of our approved policies. It has been suggested by our legal counsel to have a policy like this reviewed and adopted, especially in the context of who is allowed on our campus and what they have access to. So some schools are writing policies and reviewing policies very specific to undocumented students or to ICE's ability to be on campus. We do have already in our historical policies an acknowledgement that we don't release information about our students to organizations like ICE. And so again, this policy isn't anything in my mind controversial or different from the procedures that we currently follow, but it does reiterate and restate, and if you choose to approve in its current draft, just acknowledges that nobody is allowed on our campus without approval from our administration, that nobody has access to our student records without a release of information from the student or their parent or guardian, and that that nobody has the right to come in and see who is on our campus, period. And so rather, again, Sue, who is our legal counsel, her recommendation was sometimes specifically having new policies related to immigration or ICE specifically garnishes the kind of attention you don't want from those organizations. So her suggestion was just to have a solid, recently reviewed policy about school visitors in general. And then she has been in contact with both me and Chris Pauls. And so the reality is that if ICE were to show up at our school, Chris would call her immediately. And she would walk him through how to best protect students in that moment. But this policy also applies to probation officers, to CYFD, really to anybody in the community, just reminding staff and the community at large that we don't have an open campus, that not everybody is welcome, that people must be escorted around our students, and that their information is confidential and protected. So that is our Gordon Burnell Charter School Visitor Policy, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
I had one thing, and I'm trying to find it in my notes, but in the content of it talks about that the guardian can sign a release. I think it's under the photos. And I was thinking it would be the individual rather than a guardian. And I didn't open my file to look at. That was the only thing I had for the whole meeting today.
Okay. Certainly we can look at that language, and also students over the age of 18 in other parts of our student handbook. There's an acknowledgement that they act as their own guardian, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't correct it here, Michelle. So I'll take a look if I can find that. And then Deb, you also had your hand up.
I do, Beth. Does this also pertain to our housing? Our hotel across the way?
It's hard to, I mean, it would certainly apply to to their information. So we wouldn't, whether or not a participant is in the housing program, would, to me, is information that belongs to the student. And so we wouldn't, if someone said, are they in the housing program? I'd say, do you have an ROI signed by the student so that I can share information with you? I don't know that we can influence what is allowed on private property outside of our property, but it's a good question.
I was just curious if anyone went to the front desk, it could be ICE, it could be a gang member, it could be anybody, and asked if Joe Schmo was staying there, if that motel person could use this as well to say, I can't release that information. I guess we'd have to have legal counsel.
Yeah, and I think that they're pretty good about keeping private records as well, at least from experience. I didn't mean to cut you off, Deb.
No, you didn't. I just said, you know me. I'm that little niggly person you have.
I think I was curious in terms of, whether this will become cumbersome on admin in any way, or is it just sort of like, for example, if it's working classroom or future focused education, it's sort of, you have a partnership with them, when folks are coming. And so it's not something that, okay, you're having to write down and sign off, for each of their visits, or were there any concerns that you had, Beth, of it becoming cumbersome in any way?
Well, I think, like this phrase, visitors will be escorted by designated school staff member all times unless specifically approved for independent access. And so like, for example, in the contract that we have with Working Classroom, we talk about the scope and sequence of them running classes and groups with students. We also require all of those contractors who do have independent access to have a background check on file, and for them to, they also sign something about how they have to go through admin in order to use any student work or release, or publish any student work. And so I think that we have that covered in terms of, those individuals who have been through those background checks, who have agreed to keep students' information and products confidential. That's when they get that approval for independent access. So I really think I don't see it becoming burdensome for staff, because those hoops that we jump through for our contractors are already in place in terms of making sure that our students are safe with them. And so I think those are things that we've been doing anyway, if that makes sense.
Thanks. And how about events like when you have an open house or even like graduation, which is offsite typically?
There is a special events, public meetings, or school functions that are open to the public will have a separate visitor procedure outlined by school administration. And in our student handbook is where that policy is currently addressed. And it pretty much just expresses the need that any school sponsored event, people who attend it are responsible to following school rules and maintaining order. It's not a long statement, but it's something along those lines. Certainly, staff have had a refresher around not sharing student information and being very, very careful, whether that be at a student event. And so many of our students are over the age of 18 and their own guardians. This comes up pretty often. No, we can't share information with you, Auntie, because you're not the guardian. He's his own guardian. Type situation. But approving this policy now is a good reminder. And it just helps us keep present in making sure that staff are well trained and aware that they can't give out information.
Okay, thank you.
And,
And do you want to scroll down to see that area that Michelle was?
Yeah, I think it's right here. It says that without explicit written consent from the student's legal guardian. We read that as a student over the age of 18, they're their own legal guardian. And so anytime that we're asking for consent from a legal guardian, unless they've signed an ROI at the age of 18, there is no guardian. And so, but I'm happy to add language there if that would. Michelle, are you interested in it saying without consent from the student's legal guardian, or from the student if over 18, something like that?
Well, I think you all know best. I'm thinking you can have a student that's over 18, but maybe on an IEP that is not their own guardian. And I don't know, I am just an individual that I just like all these little I's and T's I think about. But if what you've had, evidently what you've had in your handbook, and this is just kind of an update to your policy, has worked well and there's no concerns, I'm fine with going with what the other council members think. And what your experience has been, Beth.
In my experience just is that if a student is of age and does not have another guardian explicitly assigned, then they are their own legal guardian. So the ROI would come from them. That's pretty standard practice with us.
Okay.
Any
Beth,
other questions?
I have a couple of questions, just out of morbid curiosity. The first point that says visitors have to obtain prior approval, is that just a communication with somebody in the school saying, hey, I'd like to visit you, and an acceptance of, yes, this is an appropriate time? Okay.
Yeah.
And then way down at the bottom where it says exceptions and it lays out emergency responders and law enforcement, would those two categories also encompass ICE? So if ICE were there on official capacity, would they be granted unlimited access?
I personally don't consider ICE an emergent responder. I don't know about law enforcement though. You know, Chris Pauls and I worked on this policy together, and we had a long conversation about this particular piece. Because, you know, I just wanted it to say emergency responders. And if that was, you know, we kept law enforcement in just because, you know, he also is responsible for keeping people safe. And so if there's an active shooter on campus, if there's a danger to students or staff members, but I like the idea of just emergency responders acting there in official campus capacity, may be granted immediate access as required. I'm curious what board members think about that.
I was thinking that, well, first of all, Tina, I brought an associate from New Mexico State to visit. I just sent Beth an email. She set it all up and away we went. It was seamless. And I didn't give her like months of notice or anything. It was pretty quick. And I had a great student take us on a tour. It was really so very good. How about if we put immediate access as appropriate? And then Chris has some control, or the front desk has some control, instead of as required, because what does that mean?
And that's where he said that, you know, that we added the as required and then left the law enforcement in. But I like as appropriate, as, you know, or as necessary.
Or something like that as
Because thank you for bringing up that point, Tina, because on ICE.gov, it says ICE was created in 2003 through a merger of the investigative and interior enforcement elements of the former U.S. Customs Service and the Immigration and Naturalization Service. ICE now has more than 20,000 law enforcement and support personnel in more than 400 offices in the United States and around the world. So I think they would consider themselves law enforcement, and they use that language on their website. So yeah, it feels
I
like,
like emergency
they would,
responders.
yeah, I feel like, you know, in a case of an active shooter, the police department would be an emergency responder.
Yep.
I don't know if anybody's noticed, but ICE actually has police written on their uniforms as well. It says police on one side, and then it has ICE on the other. So that's something we probably might want to keep an eye out and inform others about.
I like emergency. Thank you, Ani, because I think that's true. I am all for this exception reading emergency responders acting in their official capacity may be granted immediate access as appropriate. I feel better. I feel great about that.
Yeah.
Any other comments on that?
just have to get rid of that one word, Beth.
Which word?
Personnel.
Responders without personnel, because you said law enforcement personnel.
Thank you. Love it.
Okay. All right, how are we feeling about moving to the action item related to this new policy? Any other last, good. Okay.
No, I'm willing to move that we approve the updated, or not the updated, the school visitor policy.
Okay, so in the motion to approve the school visitors policy, Deb has a first. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Tina. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we have approved the school visitors policy. And I'm just double checking, we do have a quorum. I know that Jody, for some reason, had to drop off and she hasn't come back, but we still have 4. So I just wanted to double check that we could make that approval. All right, and the next policy, shared leave bank policy.
Thanks. You guys have already seen 2 versions of this. One that we wrote, a second that the lawyer that provided a template once we realized that there was actual statute that mandated quite a few pieces that our original version didn't take into account. And hopefully third time's the charm. Here's Jody coming back as well. Hopefully third time's a charm. Here's our shared leave bank policy. This was shared with staff in 2 consecutive morning Monday memos with a short questionnaire asking for feedback, asking for some general feedback, asking for kind of to gauge if staff members would be willing to utilize, and because that was one of the requests that the board made last time, was to get some staff input in the hopes that we could have a policy that would be utilized and that would be well received from staff. We did have 9 staff members respond to that survey with some great comments. Michelle and I actually met last week to review that feedback, and I'd like to highlight some of the changes that we made. First of all, we did change the approval of use of the shared leave bank would not be up to the director, but instead up to a committee. That was one of the things that the board requested during our last conversation. That committee would consist of no less than 3 members convened by me or a designee, which could include myself or designee, other board members, or members of a larger leadership team. So that was one change that we made. We also did fill in some blanks in terms of how long we felt a staff member needed to be working with us in order to pull. That was 90 hours. In accordance with some of the discussion that we had at the last board meeting, we did cap the maximum amount of shared leave bank at 64 hours of leave time. That is a full 2 weeks. And so that was we talked quite a bit about that in the last meeting, just in terms of wanting to allow the possibility of more than one staff member to use the leave bank, and to also take into account some of the other options that staff have in terms of opting into to other programs as well. We did, what other things did we do in here? We did, oh, go ahead, Michelle.
There was the piece about if a staff person comes back for, say they're back for 3 weeks and they're out for a week, back for 3 weeks. We did some wordsmithing on that, I believe.
We did. We worked on that to make it I'm having a hard time finding that, but as I look through here, I'll look for it. We did in more than one place change language to try to make it more explicit that staff members who needed to go down to part-time or may have kind of multiple in and outs due to their medical situation would still be eligible, and it wouldn't just be a one-time thing. If you do remember, I didn't like the idea that what was donated had to revert back to those who donated every year, but that is in statute. We couldn't get around that in terms of and here is the statute if anybody wanted to Google this document is in alignment. We double checked and did that as well. We did require that staff members who want to donate have at least 2 weeks of their own before they can donate. Anything on top of that. The other thing we changed I think the last thing that we changed, and I'm not in my office, so I had good notes to help guide this conversation. So Michelle, please feel free to jump in. But we did, the statute says that staff members can donate a reasonable amount. And in our previous draft, we were aligned with what's in the current handbook, with saying that they could only donate 1 day annually. But we removed that 1 day. I'm going to find that spot too. Here's that phrase about employees receiving medical leave for work for part-time may continue to use donated leave for balance until medically released for full duty. So this idea that you couldn't have to be out once and then that was it. You had to give it back and you couldn't reapply. The other piece to donate would have been right here. I think we just took out completely the minimum because we felt like that staff members, as long as they had a minimum of what was left in it, could decide how much they wanted to donate. Because before we said there was a maximum that they could donate, but the statute just says that it has to be a reasonable amount. So I believe it was right here between 6 and 7, and we just took out that there was a maximum they could donate.
Yeah.
Does that sound
There
right,
is
Michelle?
a minimum of 7 hours.
There is a
There's no
minimum.
maximum.
Exactly.
And we changed that minimum too, because it had been 8.
Previously, yeah, in the lawyer's template, it said 8, but we work a 7-hour day. So the minimum for people to donate is 1 day. We took out the maximum they could donate because we figured they could decide what was reasonable for them, as long as they left that minimum in their own bank, that they could be out for 2 weeks. Again, I had good notes in my office, and I'm not on campus today, but I'm pretty sure that I covered everything that we did to this policy. I know that you all had a chance to read it this week, and there are the previous versions floating around, but certainly open to discussion or feedback at this point.
Thank you, Beth and Michelle, for working on this. I really appreciate that, staff was involved in the updates around hours and making sure that it's a policy that they're in agreement with. Any other questions or comments?
I just have a clarification. Is the statute, I mean, I guess is the point of the statute so that at the end of the year, there is a zero balance, like everything reverts back and nothing is carried over? Is that the whole point of the statute?
Yeah, that is in statute. If you Google this right here, and I'll see if I can pull up. I won't spend too much time on it. Just see the first one that comes up. This fine law has been pretty unused donate leave at the end of when no longer needed shall revert to donating employees on a prorated basis. And so what the lawyer said about this was essentially just that similarly to how Sammy spends a tremendous amount of effort in zeroing out balances and shoring up accounts at the end of every fiscal year. And then again, after the audit, kind of making sure that things align. When we saw the bars earlier today, a lot of that wasn't actual income, that was her zeroing out. So at the end of the fiscal year, the leave bank has to revert to zero. And so anyone who decides to donate, donates to the bank. Anybody who needs to access the bank can do so throughout the year. At the end of the year, what's left in the bank has to be given back to those employees. And then you start in the new fiscal year with a zero balance. People are asked to donate again. Typically just once a year as well. And that is in here that staff members are, and I think that's also in statute. Reasonable about can be by employee annually. So the way that Sue, our lawyer, read that was that the same person, if I decide to donate 2 days, and I can't donate again because it's an annual donation that is allowed. How closely anybody is policing this or following up on it, again, kind of unknown, but certainly wanting to be compliant with the laws that are out there.
Isn't there a part somewhere in here that says, though, that if something comes up, employees can be asked or solicited, or I guess made aware of there's a situation and have the opportunity to donate again in the middle of the year?
I don't know that it's again, though. I think that's this clause right here. It just
Oh.
says that if the hours in the shared leave bank are not sufficient and a medical emergency arises, the director or designee may send a communication to faculty and staff indicating such a need, but can't coerce. I don't think that takes away from we don't have that. In the eligibility to donate. but it is something that Sue talked about, was that she thinks it's only once a year that people can donate.
So then theoretically, in the beginning of the year, if someone donates 10 hours, but some emergency comes up and they have more hours that they'd like to donate, they just can't.
That was how I understood Sue's interpretation of the mandate. That is not necessarily what's in this draft. Because I'm
Yeah, I
looking
don't-
at eligibility to donate and I'm not seeing anything in place in these 9 points that says that.
I don't remember us talking about that, Beth, because I
Mm-mm.
was concerned about when the end of the year comes and it goes down to 0. If you have somebody come in right at the beginning of that, there's no hours available to them because it all reverted back.
Mhm.
I know we talked about that.
And then so staff would then, I think the intention, or at least I don't know, intention is not the right word. The common practice, or at least how I'm remembering it, when we had an active shared leave bank many years ago when I was an employee, it was like that first payroll. The business office said, anybody want to donate to the shared leave bank? And then I always did. It was at that point only a 1 day. That's what is in our current handbook right now, is 1 day. We couldn't find the actual policy that described it in detail. I always donated the 1 day. And then previously to my experience, either my days were utilized or the school wasn't reverting back at the end of the year. But I never received a prorated amount back. I just know that I always opted into donating when the business office asked. And that usually was typically the very first payroll. There was a message that went out, who's interested in donating. I never attempted to pull out, and I wasn't in a position to have knowledge about how the bank was used, or if my hours were utilized, or if they got eaten up. I really don't know.
And I will share with the council. Oh, Janelle's got her hand up, but I'm sorry, Janelle, give me half a second. I will share that there was individuals that responded saying they would not contribute. And the primary reason is because they've used up, they don't have extra time to give. So, and now I'll be quiet because Janelle was nice and raised her hand.
Oh, sorry. I only know how it worked at my previous employer. And I think it was like quarterly or semi-annually was the donation periods. But ours did revert back if no one used it, but typically it was used. But there was, it wasn't that you could donate leave all the time. There was only prescribed times you could do it.
Will you go back to that statute? You had pulled up the website for it, Beth? Yeah, that, because I had seen what you were talking about in terms of like the, annually, and that each employee shall maintain a certain amount, minimum amount of leave before making a donation of leave. I don't know if the annually doesn't necessarily mean it just has to be once per year. I mean, I think it is thinking on like an annual basis, because then it reverts back and you would start again the next year. So if I trust Sue had created this outline and that she knows the statute well and had prepared it for us in that way. And so I think you're right in sort of assuming that it would be okay for them, if you do solicit for more donations later in the year, that employees would be able to donate again, because Sue didn't previously write anything in there about, multiple donations. Any other questions or things that we need to address? I think this is a really solid policy. We've done some great work here. Thank you to Beth again and the staff and Michelle for helping with that. it's always something that, you know, we can address policies in the future and come back to them should we need to. Should we move toward voting on this action item? Okay. All right. Do I have a motion to approve the updated sick leave bank policy?
A motion to approve the updated sick leave policy.
Thank you, Jody. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Tina. All in favor?
I.
I,
Right, we have approved the updated sick leave bank policy. Woohoo! It's always nice when we've, you know, put some time and effort into these policies and hope that they do well for school and staff. All right, then on to performance review.
I'm gonna just share, this was linked in my director's report. And I'm not gonna, it took me hours to present this. And so I'm gonna do a really high level. But as you all know, we are a turnaround school in terms that because of our graduation rates, we're considered a school that's in need of improvement and transformation. Right now, that's not a horrible thing because it comes with funding. Which we utilize and appreciate. And it also comes with some interesting support in terms of what monitoring looks like. We have very supportive team that comes out from the school priorities board at PED. And right now we're in a kind of a pattern where we're seeing them 3 times a year, beginning, middle, and end. And they're very interested in understanding our data, and how we are intervening to improve our graduation rates. I'll say it to them. I've said it to you multiple times. I'll say it again just for kicks. The only way that we're going to improve our graduation rate is by having a time machine and going back in time and graduating people by the time they're 18. When we know that students who join us are not on track to graduate. And so it is unlikely that a lot is going to change in terms of graduation rate, but the added budget, the added supports, the discussion about how we better serve our students has been really fruitful and successful, and doesn't necessarily feel like a burden to me. It feels like we have a supportive team who asks really good questions and encourages really good discussions in terms of how we're serving students and how we can continue to improve the way that we serve students. So I started that with sharing our mission and just saying we are dedicated to our population and they don't track well in the data, but we're not going to abandon them because we want to track well in the data. So just acknowledging that we are full aware of that. I talked a lot about how complicated our school is. We looked at our strategic plan, which really is identified these desired outcomes. We want to get better at monitoring student progress through specifically our ILPs, our individualized learning plans, and our advisement model. We want to make sure that we're not just writing a semester-long goal and then abandoning it, but that we continue to work with students to intervene and revise and really help them meet their own goals, because we feel that's a really important thing. We're really trying to focus on more direct instruction with our curriculum. Some students are great self-directed learners, but many need structure and support. And so it's one of our desired outcomes that we're maximizing direct instruction and we're really looking for clear explanations, modeling concepts, and demonstrating skills is what we want to see our teachers doing. And then we're also looking to develop critical vocabulary lists for all of our curriculum. While that is a SIOP strategy, which is a way to really help our English language learners, we also know it's good for all students when they can access vocabulary and access prior knowledge and all of that fun stuff. If you looked at this already and you didn't realize that so many of the things are linked, and you want to go back, I geeked out a little bit on this presentation, and almost every picture has a link in it. But you can see our most recent report from APS, which I shared with you at the last board meeting, green, looking really good. I talked a lot about, again, we're in designation because of our graduation rate. So I thought I'd share some alternative data points besides just the ones that the state collects. This is a really neat graph. It's the number of graduates every year that the school has graduated. This blue and red is pretty cool on the right. It's the percentage of seniors that we graduate every year, which is pretty amazing. And then up in the right-hand corner, we're last 3 years have graduated about 20% of our total enrollment. And that's almost like, you know, I'm going to do the math really quick. I'm just going to do last year, which is 75. So we graduated 22% of every high school student that even enrolled. But if we look at the number of students that we were funded on, we graduated 40% of the students that we were funded for. And so, you know, these are good statistics. You know, pretty important also to remember that we have taken data and disaggregated it, and most of our students have been out of school for 3 years. That's an average. They're not transferring from another school, they're re-engaging, which means that they were all dropouts. And so, you know, to think of that kind of is another way to look at it. These are the numbers that actually matter, though, in terms of how we're being evaluated. This is our 4-year cohort. Daniel Bardo is a real person at PED who's amazing and answers his phone and helps you figure stuff out. And so he pulled, these are his data. And you can see our graduation rate over time. The point that really kind of blew him away, and he's going to take back to his team, is in this chart to the right. When you talk the cohort size, and these are numbers of people, but they don't represent real people. They represent, state of New Mexico uses a shared accountability system. And so they're not looking at just where a student graduates, but where a student has attended throughout their high school career. And so we share graduation rates with the other schools that our students have enrolled in the past. And so our cohort size is the denominator. This is how many students should have graduated that year in a shared accountability model. And then our grad credits is the number of students we did graduate that year. And what really blew him away when we did this analysis together was the variability in the number of students who should graduate. So you see this huge spike in 2020 and you're like, wow, what did they do that year different? Absolutely nothing. We had a few more graduates, I'll say there. But also we had a much smaller denominator. That was the year that COVID shut us all down, and the youngsters, they didn't stay in school because no one was going to school. So they were like, So who we had was some of those older students who'd already lost out and already felt behind. But just the reason that spike went up so high was not necessarily because we graduated a ton more people, but because the denominator of who was supposed to graduate that year was dramatically less than the year before at 178 or the year after at 157. There was only 28 that year. So that has nothing to do with how we are preparing students or working with students. That is just how they're calculating who is supposed to be graduating. Another really scary part of who we're getting credit for, it depends on, we only get credit for them if they get enough snapshots with us. And some of the things that alternative high schools are figuring out as we dive into this data alongside PED is that often we don't capture a graduate in the right snapshot and we're not getting any credit for them. The credit for graduating them is going to the high schools that had multiple snapshots that they dropped out of. So if we enroll someone but don't capture them in consecutive reporting dates, then they don't count as being with us. It's weird. It's weird. So this was an interesting kind of journey to share in there. There's this, I'm not going to go through much more of this, but I wanted to share some proficiency rate data, which is really interesting. This is a kind of, one of the things that we talked about in our dash. If we're trying to raise graduation rates, we're saying that the way to do that is to increase individualized learning plan goals. If we want to raise skills, the way to do that is to increase credits. And so then we're talking about how do we increase credits? Our credit acquisition numbers tanked this year. We're already gaining momentum and kind of turning that curve. But that's because we're no longer awarding credit for completion. We're awarding credit based on standards-based curriculum when students are demonstrating skill at particular levels. And so I think that these numbers are going to jump pretty significantly as staff and students together understand how this curriculum works. But we will notice this drop, and that's an interesting thing that we shared. Lots of other data points in here about our program numbers, courses, attendance. It was a pretty comprehensive site visit. I feel like it went really well. And in order to leave you guys time, I'm gonna cut it short and just wanted to also acknowledge that a lot of staff members contributed to preparing this data. And so I just wanted to end by saying I was really grateful for the efforts. And while we may not get ever out of designation, again, what this progress monitoring is doing is prompting really great conversation and collaboration among staff to understand our data and to really work to improve it. So my last thought before I get quiet, I know I already said that, but I really feel like we've turned a corner, and it's a long time coming over the last couple of years, but of moving from being data compliant to data informed. And then, the next step after that is, for me, is data driven. And we're not at data driven yet, but I don't think we're just data compliant anymore. I think we're really data informed in that most staff members are looking at data in new ways and it feels like progress to me in terms of understanding not only how we're held accountable by the state, but also how we're held accountable to students. So good conversation.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this, Beth. There's wealth of information that we can dive into, and it helps cover our 30% around, some of our board priorities, because academics are part of our board priorities. Questions or comments on the data review, performance review?
Thank you for pulling this together. This is really important information, especially when people need to see these different numbers and know the background for where these numbers came from. So thank you for compiling that.
Other questions? Great. I know that there was a lot there. We will continue to have opportunity to discuss the schools and the students' academic performance. I really like how you phrased that, Beth, of moving from data compliant to data informed, and then the eventual data driven. So it's nice to have that as kind of like an end goal, and know that we've made progress there. All right, we're gonna then move into board priorities, which like I said, it kind of overlaps then with some of the performance. So first line of business is, during our training, we did have some time to brainstorm putting together some SMART goals. Ideally, this would be something that we would do at the beginning of each school year. So we had some of those priorities in mind, but we didn't have them in place in a way that gave us some actionable steps to be working towards those priorities, some SMART goal formatted priorities. And so I went ahead and kind of filled in some additional blanks from where we were. One moment, and I'll pull up. I put it in the shared drive. Was everyone able to access the document, the agenda?
Do you want me to pull it up, Martha, or do you have it?
Sure, if you have it ready at hand, Beth. I was just looking it up in the drive.
That's where I'm headed as well, but that way you can talk and I'll get it up here in just a
Okay,
second.
thanks. All right. So did folks have a reaction to kind of the fleshed out priorities for this year? Or any questions, comments? Okay, I think the biggest thing that we'll need to kind of spend a little bit of time filling in today is kind of the person's responsible of thinking about how are we going to make these steps actionable and move them forward by these dates. We were trying to think about, what can we achieve by the end of the school year, and then we'll revamp again for the new school year. So one of the first things, awesome, we have a win of the 30/30 agenda that we are going to be spending more of this concerted time on board priorities. So that's done. Part of focusing on academic outcomes is reviewing data. That's partially what we had done today. And so some of the resources needed are, that wonderful PowerPoint that Beth put together, but there are also kind of like other yearly, the Dash that you can look at, Dash or Vista as resources. Part of that is we had the question of, is a committee needed to be an additional academic committee who would like to meet on occasion to review this type of data and make suggestions around areas for concern or support, or what do folks feel like? Because we can create a committee. A committee can also include non-board members. So if you have folks who from the community are really invested in this, they don't necessarily want to be full-time board members, but they're interested in like academic outcomes and data, they're welcome to join as well. We could have teachers be a part of the committee. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, Deb.
Excuse me. I kind of think that's up to Beth. You do a great job, I think. I think we also are moving along the continuum you discussed with your teachers so that we can be data driven sometime in this life. Our job is not to interfere in how academics are moving along. I'm not sure, Beth, do you think that a committee would be helpful to you? Because I think right now you do a great job of letting us know what's going on. And I'm not sure what we can do.
I don't necessarily, I'm not feeling a urgent need for an additional meeting necessarily, or nor I'm not feeling unsupported, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'm not in search of I'm reminded of, do we have a problem that needs a solution, or do we have a solution and we're looking for a problem? I don't have a problem right now with preparing information and sharing it, nor with the amount of feedback or support I'm getting. But that being said, I certainly am open to and willing, if the board would like to take a deeper look or to have a time. I think part of where this came from is sometimes these meetings feel very rushed, and there's a lot of information. And I think that Martha and I have commented sometimes that maybe the discussion isn't as rich as it could be because we're trying to do all of it in an hour and a half just once a month. And so certainly if the board, certain board members wanted to spend a little bit of time that doesn't feel so pressured in terms of we're stretching out the meeting, we're taking too long, I don't know if I want to ask more questions, or I don't know if that's an experience that board members have. But knowing that we're trying to squeeze a lot of information into a very short time, the idea of a committee kind of takes some of that pressure off, and allows some members to reflect and do a little deeper of a dive. And I'm all for that. And then similarly to how the finance team reports back, to the larger board, an academic achievement goal team could do the same thing. And if there are board members who feel like that they have a desire to know more or to give better feedback, they wouldn't also be, feel pressured that had to fit into, a time that can, we get a little antsy around 5:30, 5:45, just, we've been sitting for a long time. So I'm open to that because it would provide a different space to discuss it, but it's not something that I'm feeling like I have a gap that needs to be filled. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that kind of shares the fact that there were a lot of new board members who weren't as familiar with reviewing and interpreting academic data. And so kind of wanting to feel like we had a better grasp of where the school is at and how to explain that, or like in our own words, how would we explain how the school is doing, how the students are doing. So I think that's kind of where this priority was coming from at the beginning of this year. But yeah, maybe part of it is also just like with the continuous input on reviewing academics throughout the board meetings, having some of these conversations embedded within, having continued, board trainings, maybe that is enough for people to feel more confident with understanding and talking about the school's academic performance as well. And Jody, were you going to say something?
Not in addition to that, I agree with what Beth is saying, and I think that is important to, to really, I don't know, to see where things are going. If we do need to form another committee, that I understand that too. That's all I was going to say.
Is there anyone that is interested in that kind of committee and would be willing and want to create that? And if not, no pressure either, we're just kind of openly putting it out there. Jody?
Yes, I could help with that committee.
Well, this one I would say, again, that's not necessarily tied to the academic, goals here. Part of the data review is just having a regular schedule of when we are going to review and assess academic data during our governance council meetings throughout the year. And so we have a wonderful calendar. Beth highlighted it again in the director's report about what kind of the schedule of our board meetings are throughout the year. And so I would like to kind of put together a similar document that will let board members know, like, this is where we get pieces of academic information we can know to expect and be prepared for them. Would there be anybody that would be willing to put together kind of a general overview calendar of when does the site visit happen and when do those pieces of data come out that we'll be reviewing?
It can certainly be a part of that if a board member wants to do that with me. I wouldn't expect that person to necessarily know those things, but we could work together to create kind of a guiding document.
Okay, so Beth and Deb.
And why doesn't Jody, because I can't figure out what Jody's responsibility would be until we've sort of looked this whole thing over. So maybe Jody and I can take a look, come up with a calendar and see what we're thinking about. Jody, would that work for you?
That sounds like a great plan, Deb. Yeah.
Okay. I'll add that then to the strategic plan. All right. And the reviewing academic achievement goals, I think that is more of like, do we have particular goals around supporting the school in academics. So that might also, just considering, do we need to, that's not necessarily our responsibility either, if we are confident in our understanding and ability to analyze during board meetings, we might not necessarily need to make further assessments or report on those academic goals throughout the year. How are folks feeling on that last action step?
Why don't we get the calendar and everything together? Because I think that we currently have the opportunity to review. This will just, because Beth presents it, we just have to look at what she gives us every month to look at and see if we really do need anything else that talks about how we're going to support it. And I think if we have our head sort of around, oh, today we're going to talk about the site visit, that might help us frame what we're doing in terms of academics.
Okay. Yeah, I think that sounds great. And like we said, we're just kind of making them simple. We're beginning the process of creating and following through with SMART goals. So I'll remove that last action item. Okay, so moving on to our focus priority 2. So recruitment and retention. So a big part of that, we were achieved some goals already for this year in our 2 new board members. So thank you again, Tina and Michelle, for joining us. But then that next step is also thinking of the retention, as well as then thinking of future transitions, like just more of the long-term succession plan. So I should probably add in recruitment, retention, succession. So I phrase that as that we would create a succession plan to ensure the sustained recruitment, retention, and transition of governance council members, committees, and leadership. I added those in there. So not just thinking of how many members that we have, but also of thinking about folks on committees and being a part of leadership. One of the things that we do need to visit is in our bylaws, it does say that each board member has to serve on a particular committee. And so that's something that I'm going to be reaching out to folks. I'm going to write myself a note, because we have a few committees. Not all of them are not time intensive in terms of there's a few where they're Beth's evaluation committee. There is the finance committee is more of the monthly. Auditing committee is usually tied in with finance, but somebody could also separately serve on the audit committee. And then in terms of officers, something to think about in terms of success if something happened, where I have to miss a meeting, I'm suddenly sick. We haven't really had a practice of someone else being able to lead, the board meetings, if I'm not able to be there. And so I will also reach out to board members about if anyone would be interested in the role of vice president. I'm coming up on 2 years of serving. I think the 3rd year would be great to have a person who is interested in being the president, and they could kind of serve as the vice president for a year, shadow, get their feet before then they would take over the role after my 3rd year. Because that will be also 5 years of me serving on the board. So just wanting to know too that we have kind of some transitions planned in terms of leadership roles, committees, so that we're, successful and we don't have a situation again where the majority of the board drops off all at once and we have all new board members, of kind of having that rotation there. So I'll be sending out emails around that. Is there anyone, I know we did talk about tools such as either an orientation folder or document that helps more clearly state for new board members, what the processes are and has links to all the different resources that might be helpful. Are there folks who might want to volunteer for reviewing, kind of updating and creating things such as the new member orientation folder?
I'll say, I don't know if I want to volunteer for that group, but I had an idea about it. But as you guys are doing the calendar, and so I can volunteer for it because there's some ways I think that's where some of my skill set is, but kind of putting all the pieces together. As you create the calendar, I think it would be helpful to have what would support a board member to be prepared for that item that's going to happen on that board meeting. So like annually when we're reviewing the inspection, and I don't have all the terminology right yet, but what are some things that board members should look for in the drive and things like that? I think that would be a way of ongoing orientation. And then I think it would help Beth and you both if we can be more prepared to think about on a wider thing. It's like I reviewed everything yesterday and things like that, but there was the one thing when it came up about the handbook, and I didn't think about looking in the handbook for that one piece. So
yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. So thank you for volunteering for that area. Is there anyone else who's interested in that particular action item?
Martha, do you foresee this taking place like next month?
Yeah, I assume, I just kind of put general dates that I thought might fit, depending on how heavy of a lift it was and the due dates of other items. So I do expect like maybe a meeting and then a few tasks that each person might do on their own, and maybe a few email communications between now and our April meeting. So it would kind of more be, we'd have about 2 months time, because from this standpoint on through March, and then kind of have a finalized, recruitment tool or folder by the April meeting.
So I can help with any or all of that, but I will be out of the country in March, and so I won't be much help during that period of time.
But it might be something even, like before our meeting in April, like if we have collected a few things, then getting your feedback, having you look through it when you're back in April or something before our
Yes.
meeting. So
Yeah, absolutely.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. And you can add my name to that as well, Beth. Thank you for updating there. And then the board succession plan, that's something too where, Beth has created her own succession plan as director. And so that's something that we can use as sort of a template. And there are examples that Kelly has given us as well. That's something that I can kind of work through and then send out to folks to review and provide comments on. Yeah, I also don't necessarily think that that's going to require like a short-term committee. I was just kind of throwing it out there. Or is there anyone that really loves the idea of succession plans and wants to work on it with me? Okay, that might be something. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'd be happy to help with that, with a succession plan. I don't know necessarily. I'm happy to help. I don't have like a background in that though.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Jody. And it might just be like bouncing off a few ideas. And Beth, would you mind if we add your name on there? Just because I'm curious since you have that experience of kind of creating your own succession plan, that we just sort of touch base there. And so we have a little bit of time, I think, part of it would be first the task of seeing what we already have for resources and then thinking to a more formal document that could help us beef up, ensuring that the board is strong for years to come. Okay. And then moving down to our third priority, that just simply we're going to get into this new process of having strategic priorities and goals. And so this is really looking forward to creating new ones in July. And so thinking ahead that we start to collect and review some of the documents and data related to these goals. So the strategic plan will be one of them that we can get together for May, looking through our new 30-30-30 agendas from February to July and how successful that's been for us, and any of the other action items. So that can be something that I can be responsible for, of kind of just bringing those things together and making sure it's on the agenda for our May meeting. I don't think we'll particularly need any additional support there. And then the completing and reviewing the governance council assessment tools, that's something that we did actually last year at the training, that helped us evaluate, like, how are we doing, what more do we want to be doing. We didn't formally do that during this training, but we still have the self-assessment, and so that's something that I'll probably be sending out also for the May meeting, is have everyone individually fill out our board self-assessment and see how we're doing, and review that briefly in the meeting of like, all right, we have started doing these things this year. What would we like to do for next year? That'll help us plan for our priorities and goals. Starting to brainstorm in June so that once we get to that July meeting, a lot of the pre-work has been done and we can just kind of like formally agree on items, language. So we'll say for that, completing and reviewing the assessment tools, that'll also just be all of governance council members. I'll be responsible for that first action item. And then also the last item will be the council as a whole. Okay. So hopefully these all seem like very doable things that we're not adding too much to anyone's plate. I'll send out emails around committee involvement, and if anyone expresses interest in perhaps taking on the role of vice president, we can definitely have conversations around that. There are additional roles that are in the bylaws. We kind of decided they're not necessarily ones that we need filled. Like, there is an opportunity to have a treasurer. We don't necessarily need to have one filled unless someone feels like, oh yeah, I feel called to do that, and they would like to maybe be a signatory on checks, for example. If I can't sign checks, that person could also be a secretary. We don't necessarily need, we so appreciate Erica taking notes, so we don't necessarily need someone taking minutes on our side. But I would see it as being a combined secretary treasurer if we do want someone to have the ability to sign for me. So that's something that I'll kind of email out. And the process is really simplified now, especially since I live in a different location. We do virtual signatures online. I used to go to the office a lot and physically sign checks, but we've decided it's also appropriate to be able to virtually sign them. So look for those emails. Other questions, comments, thoughts on how we structure this portion of board priority time? All right, yeah. As Beth said, the meetings do seem really quick, and we don't want to take up too much of folks' time, but I do really appreciate us feeling a little bit more active and involved, and it's not necessarily just report outs to us. And I want to have folks feel invested and that they have kind of a purpose, and are taking definitive action. So I appreciate everybody. All right. that was everything that I had. We don't have any real pressing upcoming dates, just our next meeting on March 20th. And let's see, we did all of our action items. I will be sending out an email, and we'll be further discussing officer roles and committee membership. I think another item that we should prioritize, it's not necessarily linked to specific SMART goals, but reviewing the bylaws, and maybe that could even be an idea for a next priority area, because it's one where we updated the bylaws the year before, but there's just a lot in there in terms of like, are we making sure that we're following all of them? So there is a checklist that Kelly has given us that we can kind of follow. So that might be a future goal for us. All right, thank
Do
you
you
all.
all have that checklist? Because I looked at that when I was reviewing everything and I thought, oh Lord, did I forget that we got a checklist? Did we get that or you all have it?
It should be in, you know, all of the
folder?
training items that Kelly sent
Okay.
out. And let's see what it was.
And this is what I should do maybe is just print stuff, because sometimes the volume of stuff that is shared electronically is like intense. So I will look for it as long as I know I should know it's there.
Yeah, and part of that too is like a good point for having an
Okay.
onboarding type of or orientation folder that helps direct you to those particular items. You know, I was also looking at, there's a site visit for APS, and they also have a short like checklist for what the board is doing. So I think I was including that, but that was under a general APS site visit checklist. And let's see what the name of it was.
I think it was Beth that pulled that up so I could see where it was.
Yeah, and you should all have access. I quit sharing again because I was like, I don't know if people want to see me look around, but our shared drive, you should have access to this board resources, not only access, but the ability to add documents, edit documents. And so this board resources folder, I think you all have access to the whole GC board file. And so, yeah, I mean, there's Charmaine. And so, again, if you need help getting back to this or want me to send you links, but you all as a viewer can see all of our board documents going all the way back to many years ago. And then more recently, we have this board resources file where all of the things that we get from our integrated trainings are, as well as other things. Our bylaws are in there, but our bylaws are also just on the website. I wanted to point out as well, our most current bylaws are also can be just viewed from the website itself. If you want access to, if you're struggling to find any of those shared drive, just shoot me an email and I'll send you the links and you can star them again. But you should be able to go into them as a viewer to all of them. And then that board recess document, your editor, so if you wanted to add documents or that, you should be able to do that as well.
Yeah, now that I go into the training folder, I know that Kelly had referenced a checklist for bylaws, but I'm not seeing it in there now. So it might be
But we
something
can
that I
ask
need
her.
to like
We can ask her
request
to
from
send it,
Kelly.
yeah.
And I do have those shortcuts on my computer. It's me having to get the brain to shift into second gear.
Yeah, there's
It's a lot.
lots of documents, lots of names, so definitely understand that. All right, well, any last comments, questions, thoughts? Right, yeah, so I'll find that checklist. I know it was in my notes as something Kelly
I saw it
referenced as a
too.
good tool, but I guess we
I
don't really have it.
I recognized it when she pulled it up. I recognized it. So
Yeah. All right, do I have a motion to close the February 20th Gordon Bernal Charter School Governance Council meeting?
I move we adjourn the February 20th Gordon Bennell Government Council meeting.
Thank you, Deb. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Jody. All in favor?
Aye.
Right. The meeting has been adjourned at 5:43 p.m. All right. Thank you so much for your time, everyone.